In front of them was what Brian recognized as a parachute. It covered a large section of the floor and their circle of moms and babies was formed around it. Edna had left, but another carer who introduced herself as Claire cheerily directed the mothers to each grab a corner of the parachute and to lift it high in the air on her mark. Mama places her mouth right by Brian's ear and whispered, "Okay baby, when Mama lifts the pretty blanket up, you get over to the other side just as fast as you can. Mama will give you a special juice baba afterwards." "Okay mommies, lift," Claire yelled, and the parachute went up. With all the cheers of encouragement, Brian couldn't help but get caught up in the spirit of the thing. He forced himself forward, immediately dropping to his hands and knees and crawling forward. The parachute's primary colors filtered the lights on the ceiling, casting a bright rainbow of light across the floor and the other babies. A young man in a big bird romper was creeping faster than Brian, and his competitive streak made him force his hands and legs to move faster. Halfway across and the parachute was coming down, threatening to collapse on them and trap them. With a pounding heartbeat, Brian didn't think how silly that idea was, he just pushed faster. The parachute sprang upwards again just as it seemed ready to touch their heads. Happy with the reprieve, Brian decided to try and walk the rest of the way. Surely with all this adrenaline flowing he could force his muscles to work correctly. He rose to his knees, but it was impossible to get a foot on the floor without something to pull himself up on. A confused-looking Rachel reached his side, also on her hands and knees. Without a word he grabbed her shoulders and used the girl to push himself up. She glared at him and called out in surprise. But he didn't care, his knees had straightened and he could feel the carpet under his bare soles. He was standing. With wide, halting steps he moved forward. He could hear Mama shouting her praises as he took step after step. Mamas on the other side of the circle were nodding and smiling at him, and that made him feel all good and warm inside. He made it a full 6 steps upright before his ankle rolled and he dropped heavily to his hands and knees again. But at least he'd made it all the way to the other side. Just as he reached the Mama on that side, the silky material of the parachute brushed over his head and neck as it dropped to the floor. Brian smiled up at her, proud he'd made it in time. She knelt before him and tickled him under the chin. "What a cutie pie you are," she said. Brian was starting to feel like a puppy, on his hands and knees being petted. He pulled back and looked around for his Mama. She wasn't where he'd left her anymore. He needed Mama so much. She did everything for him because he couldn't do anything for himself anymore. If she disappeared, what would become of him? He wanted Mama now. "Mama," he called out, tears forming in his eyes. "Where, Mama?" A hand on his shoulder and the scent of Mama immediately soothed him. "Shh, sweetie, Mama's right here, baby," she assured, pulling him into a much-needed cuddle. Brian slowed down his rapid breathing as he cuddled in her arms. He had to remind himself that he was being silly, that Mama would never abandon him. He was her baby and she loved him so much. No, she'd never leave him. Once he'd calmed down a bit, Mama produced a nice big baba filled with apple juice. It looked so appealing, he grabbed for it right away, though he had trouble holding it at first. After dropping it to the floor once, Mama helped him to grip it with both hands. He took the rubber nipple in his mouth and began to suckle. The juice was nice and sweet, quenching his thirst and tasting good. He sucked greedily, downing half the bottle in a matter of moments. "What a thirsty little man," Mama commented. Brian took the nipple out of his mouth long enough to declare, "Yummy. I'm glad you like your baba, honey."